Uh, Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Robert Gordon. I'm the president of the Chevy Chase Citizens Association. My co-host is Vice President Rasheen Carbon, and helping with timing is Jory Barone. We welcome all of the attendees. Thank you for taking time out from your evening to meet the Ward 3 City Council and attend this forum. CCCA is more than 100 years old, representing all people living in the community. We welcome candidates Matt Frumin and David Krucoff. Thank you for being here this evening. We have prepared questions that represent the most pressing issues in the neighborhood that are based on the input of residents. And I've asked for residents to send me questions, and they've sent quite a few. We've asked the candidates to be clear, candid, and succinct. The chat function allows attendees to communicate with panelists, but not with each other. We've had an incident that has been embarrassing, and we don't want that to occur again. The Q&A function will be used for attendee questions. Each candidate will have the opportunity to speak for 3 minutes to introduce themselves and name one or two of the most important issues that they will champion if elected to the City Council. And we'll start out with Matt Frumin.
Thank you very much, Robert, and thanks to all of the people who are joining this evening. My name is Matt Frumin. I'm the Democratic nominee for the Ward 3 Council seat. I'm an attorney, husband, father of 3 Janney, Deal, and what was then known as Wilson High School graduates. 15 years ago, I moved from being very active on national and international affairs to becoming hyper-local. I served on my ANC for 6 years, half of them as chair. I served on the board of Tenleytown Main Street, half of them as chair. I chair the board for the Lisner Home, an assisted living nursing facility on Western Avenue that serves low-income DC seniors. I worked with others to create a citywide coalition, the Coalition for DC Public Schools and Communities, to press for improved education across the city. The Ward 3 Education Network was created at my dining room table. My signature has been to listen, learn, build consensus, and get important things done. Examples of that include, at the Lisner Home, we're about to build the first ever Housing Production Trust Fund project in Ward 3. And 93 units of deeply affordable senior housing, and we're doing it with the support of our neighbors. At Livingston Park, when the city wanted to put lights on the baseball field, I worked with neighbors and people who were part of an informal dog park to hammer out a way to do it that could work for everybody. And we did, and 15 years later, that agreement continues to work. When American University wanted to move the law school from Massachusetts Avenue to Tenley Circle, I worked with the university and neighbors for months, and we hammered out terms on which it could be done. Time after time, I've taken this approach of working with people, listening to what's on their mind, and getting the job done. That is the approach and the skill set that I want to bring to the council. We have big challenges in front of us and opportunities. I want to work with you and others across the city to address school overcrowding, to ensure that we have strong school budgets for all of our schools, to increase services for seniors, to expand transportation options, to address the issues that have been raised by the voucher program in many of our apartment and condominium buildings, to attack crime with more police, but also by changing the relationship between the police and affected communities, freeing police from tasks that could better be done by others, building on alternative solutions like violence interruption and restorative justice, and attacking the root causes of crime. People who have hope are much less likely to commit crimes. There is a lot to do. I want to win your vote and work with you and others across the city to make as big of a difference for our ward and city as we can together. Check me out on fruminforward3.com. I hope to win your vote on November 8th. Thank you very much.
Thank you. David?
Good evening, Ward 3, and thank you to the Chevy Chase Citizens Association for hosting us this evening. My name is David Krucoff. I'm a third-generation Washingtonian and a resident of our ward. I was a lifer at Georgetown Day School, which means that I attended GDS from kindergarten all the way through high school. I've owned a wholesale bakery in Ward 8, and I'm a father of a child on the autistic spectrum, and I was frustrated when his needs were not met in our public school system. Above all, I am a political reformer, and I consider myself a warrior for democracy. Tonight is a wonderful opportunity to evaluate me versus my opponent. Two important questions are, should Chevy Chase create an historic district? And should the small area plan be pursued? I do not believe that there will be some differences, but not drastic differences between us in those departments. But rather, I would expect to see significant differences between us regarding the overall direction of the city and of the council in its message to us. Domination is beyond control. What happens when one party dominates for decades? The answer is dangerous overreach. Over the last 4 years, DC Council, often joined by our mayor, has repeatedly bought into well-meaning but misguided left-wing objectives, and then after they've bought into it, they've acted upon that buy-in. My opponent has stated that he is to the left of Mary Che. Electing him means that the left-wing buy-in on the council is not just continued, it will be solidified. Examples: consequences should not exist for Farragut jumping or for the re-registration of vehicles with multiple tickets. Connecticut Avenue must be cut down to size. Criminal offenders must not be appropriately prosecuted. Undocumented immigrants should have the right to vote. Taxes must be raised even though we have a surplus. Who remembers the last time we went too far in DC? It's happening again, and it's clear to see. Enough. By now, many understand that I best represent the views and aspirations of our ward. But do enough voters understand this? Your vote is key. I am the conscientious, centrist, socially progressive Republican, the kind we wish there were more of. Now is the time, Ward 3. It is no accident that I received the endorsement of the Washington Post. The editorial board says that I possess the right positions, and one-party rule has been unhealthy for DC. Barack Obama called for hope and change. Our campaign calls for change to provide hope. New ideas and visions must be voiced and heard. We must have the courage to listen, and if you are like me, bravely speak. My name is David Krucoff. I am running for council for Ward 3. I ask for your vote so that we can thoughtfully change course together.
Thank you very much, David. We're gonna, as we go through the questions, we're gonna get into some of those in greater depth. The first question we have has to do with education, and my friend Rasheen is going to take this question.
Thank you, Robert. Matt, you said we need new thinking to ensure more responsive and collaborative school governance. You also recommend strong matter of right feeder systems from pre-K through 12th grade throughout the city. What do you mean by these statements? What kind of new thinking? How would you describe the effect of your ideal feeder systems on Ward 3? What about overcrowded schools here in Upper Northwest? And then my question for David is, Some years our students scored well on national tests, showing an upward trend, and we celebrated. And in following years, the scores declined again. David, you say that social promotion is not acceptable. Our students should be prepared for college and exposed to rewarding career paths. What steps would you take on the City Council to improve education in DC and make your goals happen? Please be specific.
Matt, why don't you take the first? Your
Okay.
question.
I tried to take notes while, I'm sorry if I turned away. I was trying to take notes because you warned us about multi-part questions and you were true to your word. Okay, so new thinking and related to responsiveness. So one of the questions around school governance is the straw man gets set up all the time. Like we're going to go back to the old days and we're going to have a radical change on school governance. My position on school governance, the biggest thing about my position on school governance is that this OSSE, the Office of State Superintendent for Education, which is the evaluator, should be taken out from under the mayor and should have independence. Why is that important? The mayor has responsibility over DCPS, and I would not change that. I would leave the mayor over DCPS. So in that sense, mayoral control, I support that element of mayoral control. It led to significant increased investment in our schools when the mayor, whoever the mayor is believed that they would be held accountable for it. But OSSE, the evaluator, is controlled by the evaluated, the mayor. That does not make any sense. And we saw that just a few short weeks ago. You talked, Rasheen, about in your question to David about the change in the test scores. They go up, they go down. Well, most recently, they went dramatically down during the pandemic. And when those results came out and they showed devastating results, the Office of the State Superintendent released those results on the Friday before Labor Day. It should have been alarm bells. If it was an independent evaluator, they would say, we have a terrible problem. We need to fix this. Controlled by the mayor, they buried it. I'm telling you about it, but they buried it. And that's kind of dynamic is not what we need when we're addressing the real issues around education. Responsiveness, right now we have an education committee that is part of the committee of the whole. So the chairman, who has many, many responsibilities, is the point person on education. He works really hard to make things happen, but he's got a lot on his plate. How can we be fully responsive when we've got a person in that kind of position who is charged with being the point on education? Similarly, the State Board of Education, it isn't that the State Board of Education should take over everything, but the State Board of Education doesn't even have the authority to raise individual issues to hear from the public on. They need permission to do it. We can.
Matt, can you focus more on what the ideal feeder system looks like for you?
Sure. So the ideal feeder system, we actually pretty close to have the ideal feeder system in Ward 3. We have our problem is overcrowding. Our problem is that this feeder system has been so successful that more and more people have come here and we have overcrowding. We need to address overcrowding. But the real answer to overcrowding for Ward 3 is to have successful feeder systems in every part of the city. I did a column in the Northwest Current 10 years ago about that the future of Wilson and the Ward 3 school system turned on the success of Roosevelt and Coolidge. We need to make sure that people in every part of the city believe that they can send their child to the Matter of Right neighborhood schools from pre-K through high school, which gives them a reason to stay there. Right now, we're losing many, many families as their children approach middle school. It's partly an education issue. It's partly a future of the city issue. 20% of the kindergartners who start in 1 year, by the time they get to 6th grade, have left charter schools and DCPS together. That means their families are leaving. If you know people in that age cohort, you know that that's happening. If we're going to succeed as a city, we need to have successful neighborhood schools, pre-K through high school in every community. And if we don't, then we're not going to grow as a city, and we're going to continue to lose families.
Matt, can I interject?
Sure.
How do you balance having people who want to enter Wilson with the already overcrowding situation in Wilson and other schools in Ward 3?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we cannot be taking new out-of-boundary students in the schools in Ward 3. I think we have to address, we cannot continue to fill our schools past the breaking point. Now, that in a way, at Wilson, they're not accepting new out-of-boundary students, but because they are accepted in other parts of the elementary school system, they work their way up to Wilson, and it contributes to leading to overcrowding. But that's talking about limiting opportunities for people in other parts of the city. You have to, at the same time, be creating excellent opportunities in other parts of the city. If you're not doing that, then you're pulling up the drawbridge, and that can't work. Our interest and the interest of the school communities in other parts of the city are intricately linked. That's what I learned when I worked on the modernization of what was then Wilson High School. And now we're seeing it. We're seeing Roosevelt and Coolidge are succeeding quite well and getting real momentum. Ida B. Wells and McFarland, which feed Roosevelt and Coolidge, Ida B. Wells, Coolidge, McFarland, Roosevelt, are filled to overflowing. We have a stake in their success. That's how you address overcrowding over the long term.
Thank you, Matt.
David, would you like me to reread the question?
I think that you focused on social promotion.
Right. So I said, yeah, I quoted you when you say social promotion is not acceptable.
Yeah, I'm prepared to answer that.
Good.
So a lot of what I discuss in the campaign is because I've been listening to the community. So if I meet with somebody and have tea with them, and he tells me about his child at Jackson Reed who is not taking or is in an AP class, but no one else is in it, or is not, the AP class itself is being not as rigorous as it should be. Or I speak to somebody who's at Merch and their child is in a much lower grade, of course, and they're twiddling their thumbs because the kids in his class are not up to his speed. Both parents have the same sort of concern, which is that their child has the ability to do more, but is not being, their child's talent is not being accessed. So a lot of what I like to talk about are incentives and disincentives. So what is it that is having the teachers or the school system be afraid to put the student back maybe 1 year? I mean, we can't be afraid of that occurring. Actually, it's probably better that we do it earlier on in that child's existence than later on when the child has already been unsuccessful multiple times. So whether it's, we have to look at the incentives for the teachers, for the school system, for the principals, that would make not promoting a child less of a concern for them, because it is in the child's interest to be at a grade level with their peers. So if the child is not performing, it's going to be better than if you put the child back a little bit and have him perform, and a little bit, if he's a little bit older than his peers, okay, well, maybe he'll do better in sports. But I don't think we can't be afraid of that. So my number one point is, I say these things because I've been listening to voters. Two, I'm concerned about incentives and disincentives. And I would say one more other thing. The test scores that we've seen decline often relates to our school system being overly focused on virtual as opposed to in person. Perhaps if we were more aggressive in having our children in school over the past 2 years, then maybe they would have experienced less depression, and they would be more involved in schools day to day. So we have to lead by example. We have to be able to not pass people that are not ready to be passed, and we have to have a vibrant community involved in person. So that's my answer to your question.
Do either of you have questions of the other?
Well, I want to respond, I guess. I mean, I think that in terms of, we have learned that virtual learning doesn't deliver in the way that in-person does. And we want to be able to have our children in school. That's for sure the case. One of the things that was put on the table during the pandemic was outdoor learning. And I really want to see DCPS succeed, but I think that they fell down in not pursuing outdoor learning options in the way that they should have. But this idea on social promotion, I'm not sure, I've heard people whose children are very talented and they wish that their children had more challenges. But social promotion in the Ward 3 schools, I didn't think that that's a problem. And I think when you talk to parents in the Ward 3 schools, they're very happy. They've chosen to be there. They've chosen to come here and live here, to be in those schools. Very, very often, the biggest decision in their life about where they're going to live and spend enormous sums of money turns on their view of the schools. And the biggest thing they're concerned about is overcrowding. The experience that kids have in our schools really equips them here in Ward 3, really equips them well for the world that follows. I mean, I've seen it time and time again, and there are issues in our Ward 3 schools, but I don't think it's social promotion.
Well,
let me give David a answer to Scott.
I didn't make up this point out of thin air. I mean, I spoke to a parent at Murch. I spoke to a parent at Jackson Reed, and both parents, the parent at Jackson Reed basically told me that the AP classes were below what AP classes were, and the parent at Murch told me that he was bored in class because there was numerous children in the class who were below grade level, and the teacher had to placate to those children. And in fact, placating is something that we know well at the council because that's what they do all the time. So I think that we as a city have to live more aggressively. We have to ask more of ourselves. We have to join each other, and we have to thrive. And so that's what that's about. So I would think that we should have standards that are appropriate, but we should also encourage risk-taking. And I don't think we are.
Thank
So
you, David.
on that, wait, I want to, you've got 2 minutes set aside. So I guess you've spoken with a parent at Jackson Reed and a parent at Murch. I mean, I have spoken with hundreds of parents over the years about what's going on inside of our schools. And for sure, the kind of thing you're talking about can be an issue, but kids at Jackson Reed do quite well on the AP. On the various AP tests. I just think that it's not right to think that there's something fundamentally wrong at Jackson Reed or Murch. They're great places. Now, you can get into a situation where there's a difficult child in a classroom and that presents a challenge for the teacher, but that's the kind of thing you address through the budget to make sure that there's aids in place so that the teacher doesn't have to be consumed by just addressing the needs of one child. But fundamentally, our schools are great.
I'm not convinced that a teacher is willing to take a risk of recommending that a child should not be promoted to the next cycle or the next class. I think that perhaps our system could encourage excellence stronger. I don't deny that the Ward 3 schools and the schools specifically that you just mentioned and that you have great experience in this department. I accept that. but I just think that we also should challenge our children more so than we do.
Well, I mean, I think that our teachers, I mean, we have a
That's the last
pattern.
word on that.
What's that?
We have many topics to cover.
So I'll
And
treat it as the last word for now, but then I'm gonna sneak it in someplace else.
You've had, we were concerned that 4 minutes was too much, but I think we've proven that to be wrong. The next big topic is for both of you. It's density, zoning, and affordable housing. Many families in Chevy Chase and across Ward 3 choose to live in single-family homes, both attached and detached, with a yard and a level of privacy. The Office of Planning recently completed a highly debated small area plan that provides for greater density along Connecticut Avenue. The Office of Planning also recommended greater density, including 4 to 6 unit apartment buildings on residential streets. They call it gentle density. This was rejected by many residents and the ANC. There is some urgency in this matter because a new comp plan revision process is being planned for next year. What is your view on increasing density and upzoning in R2 residentially zoned areas of Chevy Chase to allow replacing single-family houses with small apartment buildings? And we're going to start with David on this one.
Okay. First off, generally speaking, I'm in favor of increased density on the major thoroughfares, and that includes Connecticut Avenue from Military to Chevy Chase Circle. Okay, and while I have listened to many complaints about the process with the small area plan, and also that the data behind some of the results of the small area plan were old and inaccurate, I still overall support the small area plan. I overall support allowing for more density along Connecticut Avenue, particularly on the thoroughfare. As we get back, I do not support a diminishment of single-family zoning. So that is an area where we have to maybe tweak the small area plan some, but overall, I support the small area plan, and I think that we have to be inclusive of our neighbors, and we have to increase supply of housing. We can't just, if you increase supply, obviously the price is going to go down. I'm a supply side of the economy guy. I'd like to see DCRA and zoning and other types of things that make proper development be enhanced. I'm also for transparency so that there are no surprises. It seems as if whatever the neighborhood might be, that the neighbors are worried about sort of bait and switch tactics from the District of Columbia government. So transparency has to be enhanced. Data collection has to be more accurate and up to date. But again, I am not a person who says not in my backyard. I say potentially in my backyard if we can do it right. So I think we can do it right. We can work with the small area plan. We can implement it correctly. And it's going to take time, years and years and years. There has to be demand to break ground on things. And it has to be assemblage. It's very difficult to do all these things. It's not going to be like snap your finger and all of a sudden these apartment buildings. This is going to be over time process. And there could be some room for some growth on Connecticut Avenue for starters. Thank you.
Matt, as you know, I'm sure you know that the small area plan has been adopted by the city council. So it has. What I'm most interested in at this stage is to know your thinking on the residential streets.
Right.
Are you in support of or opposed to increasing the density of property where single-family houses prevail? And I'm not talking about just detached housing, but there's plenty of attached single-family housing across Chevy Chase and throughout Ward 3.
So this is one where I think David and I may see things pretty similarly. I mean, I'll get to your question. Well, I'll start by saying I oppose the proposals for sweeping changes for the elimination of single-family zoning. That's been my position straight out of the box, always has been my position. I actually was pretty offended by the Office of Planning, including in their small area plan report, a reference to the idea of re-raising this issue. The issue had been raised in the process, had been knocked down in the process, and it was gratuitous of them to add it back in at the end as a thing that as part of the small area plan discussion, and is the kind of thing that erodes support for what otherwise might have been a positive plan. So I wish they had not included that reference. I have always said that preserving that I think there's a place for single family zoning, and that's where I am on that specific issue. I share David's view that adding supply on the corridors in the business districts is a positive thing. Near transit is a positive thing. Another thing that I have always said is that you need to be sensitive about transitions from that increased density to the houses nearby. That's the kind of thing that I have worked on over and over again to try to make sure that there's appropriate transitions between new buildings and the existing neighborhoods. And that's an important part of what's in the small area plan. Now, you need to make sure that that gets enforced and that it's built in a way that has teeth, but it's part of the references in the small area plan. So I don't support a sweeping change to single family zoning. I think the small area plan is generally positive, and the question is how to make sure that it has the teeth that it needs.
Can I chime in a little bit, Robert?
Sure, go ahead.
First off, I'm very glad that Matt and I are seeing eye to eye in this department. I would just say that the small area plan doesn't have a lot of specifics. It's really from like a 40,000 foot look down. I'm concerned about parking in the new buildings that could be built in the future. If you look at what's being developed to the north, when you go down the hill, near where my parents are living in 5-star, you go down and there's new developments down there. They put in parking so that people can access this new development near Chevy Chase Lake, it used to be called. And we should be able to dig and hopefully have enough turning radius to have parking in buildings so that the buildings work better if people want to have a car option. There's no doubt that Wisconsin Avenue, where the Giant is, where there was a crime there the other day with people bleeding, but that area, Cathedral Commons, works well because there's got a good parking lot. So when we develop, let's also be cognizant and inclusive of motorists who are numerous in Ward 3.
So let me give you a second part to this question.
Okay.
And Matt, you'll be able to respond to both
Okay.
in a minute. I'm not trying to cut anybody off.
Hi, you want a back and forth, so this is good. So I hope that you're happy with this.
The second part of this question is a local group has emerged to press for historic district designation to preserve the old houses and the historic nature of the neighborhood. Would you support in the council a plan to create a historic district designation for the commercial and residential areas of Chevy Chase. I'd like David to start on that.
Well, the answer is, if I was living in Chevy Chase, DC, I would be working against this designation. It is not my recommendation to anyone who lives in Chevy Chase, DC, to encumber their home. I'll give you an example. Other day, I was walking in Cleveland Park, and there's a house with a stop work order. They had to do some work on their chimney. Well, guess what? The stone on the chimney did not match what was allowed to have in the historic district for that historic home. How did they get found out about this? A neighbor reported this activity to DCRA, who then put a big orange sticker on the door. Now, I just would say to you, work with your neighbors, use the ANC. My recommendation would be, do not encumber your existence, your real estate. I'm in real estate. I don't recommend encumbrances. I don't think the historic district would be a good idea. Having said that, if there was an overwhelming majority of the people in Chevy Chase, DC who wanted it, and I'm the council person, I'm going to listen to the constituents. But if I live there, and even on the council, my guidance would be, this is going to lead to unintended consequences that are not going to help you all out. Don't do it.
David, I asked for clear and succinct answers, and that was clear and succinct. Thank you. Matt?
Well, I hope I'll be clear and succinct, but it's in a little different way. The thing about it is this process, it's not a council process. A qualifying nonprofit puts together an application, submits it to the Historic Preservation Review Board. The ANC weighs in and it has great weight. And the Historic Preservation Review Board analyzes the proposal based on objective criteria. So it's actually not one that the council member could write a letter one way or another, but that's not what's going to decide this. What's going to decide this is whether or not an application gets put together and how much support it has and how it fits with the criteria. If people want to do this, then it's incumbent on them as they build an application to address the kinds of concerns that David is talking about. In a historic preservation review, a historic designation application, you can have design guidelines like the design guidelines that are in the small area plan, and they may be onerous or they may not be onerous. But if there's going to be a consensus in Chevy Chase, DC about this, people are going to need to work together as opposed to turning on each other in this process. And the kinds of concerns that homeowners have about the impact on them is something that would have to be dealt with in this process. This came up years ago, and there was a vote on it, and it was rejected soundly. Where people are on it now and whether or not an application actually gets put in now, that's an open question. I think some of the concerns that are raised by the people who are advocates for a historic district, as it relates to the commercial district, actually are addressed well in the small area plan and the design guidelines in the small area plan. And the key would be to make sure that those get implemented properly. On two other things, I'm just using my time on the parking. I agree with David that you need to have enough parking. On the Civic Core, I've talked about the need to include adequate parking on the Civic Core. On the Giant, there was a certain amount of parking that was required, and when you go into that Giant parking lot, it's giant. And there are a lot of empty spaces. So you need to calibrate how much parking is required in a building so that you don't overdo it, because it does drive the cost up, but you need to have parking available. And you need to have parking available in the business district in Chevy Chase because it serves a very large catchment area that includes many seniors who aren't going to walk from a mile away to go to to the business district. They are going to drive, and you have to deal with the reality of that. And I get that, and we need to get that in our planning. Last, on the teachers, and we have for way too long been overly critical of our teachers. Our teachers are out there, boy, I couldn't do that job. And we have a lot of great teachers, and it's not that they don't have the courage to do what needs to be done. They're fantastic, our teachers, and we need to support them and not act like they're the problem, because they're not.
Minding the time and how much we have left for this forum, I'd like to move on to affordable housing. Rasheen, will you take this up?
I will. I just have a quick question from the Q&A. We have a gentleman who wants to know, do you guys live in an apartment?
I live in a single family home.
As do I.
Okay, great. Given the mayor's goal of 1,990 units of affordable housing in Ward 3, and our need to preserve existing affordable rentals for middle-income people, what 2 or 3 suggestions do you have for creating more affordable housing in Ward 3? Secondly, how many such units would be reasonable for the neighborhood of Chevy Chase? And then third, what about reopening the discussion with the wardman as Anita Bonds proposes? Why don't we start off with which, David, would you like to take that first?
Sure. So I don't have a tremendous amount of specifics, but again, I'm pro development. I would like to see. I was interested when I spoke with people about the wardman. I thought there could have been an opportunity there to do more, potentially over the ballroom, but there was complications with the way they wanted to have the whole site be cohesive and the cut throughs. I am not somebody who thinks that this should be the way it is, cut in stone. If we can look at things and open things up, okay, but there's one thing we have to do though. If you're going to have a business person count on the rules being this way and they move the goalposts, you're going to have to compensate them for that movement of the goalposts. So, or they're going to sue you and it's going to end up in court, and then nothing happens. And what we have the Superfresh site near AU. It's been, I don't know, 10 years and nothing's gone on. So I don't want things, and I do want to roll up my sleeve with my fellow council persons, with the Office of Planning, look at the rules and to see if we can accommodate more development and more housing. And I think we should be aggressive with that. Regarding housing in Ward 3, though, we also have the voucher program and management in total disarray. So, and we have tremendous amount of units, according to HUD, that are not being used. And then we have other units that are falling apart. So we have stock, and we haven't taken care of our own stock. We don't manage the people within our program. We don't screen them. So this is way beyond a real estate issue. This is a people issue. This is about management of government. This is about understanding people's behavior, understanding incentives, having people not be in a fair housing situation in perpetuity. So I think we have to really have hearings on housing right now. And I called for a moratorium on new vouchers because of all the complaints in Ward 3. And I think that potentially the mayor's 7 appointees to the DCHA Housing Authority and their board might have to go, and we might have to have a new board, because we are letting our residents down drastically. And I'm for development. I'm for more housing. I'm for working people in DC being able to do jobs and being able to afford where they live. Obviously, it's difficult because we have such an expensive place to live. But we have to open up supply. We have to open up making development easier. We can manage our systems so much better. I think we need to have aggressive hearings and potentially a whole lot of new people in management in DC.
Matt?
Okay, thanks a lot. So the question was how 2 or 3 ways that we can promote affordable housing in Ward 3,
Yep.
then on Chevy Chase, and then I'll touch some of the things that David has spoken about. So the way in which it works is when new buildings go up, there's inclusionary zoning and there are requirements for how much affordable housing will go in there. And if that is all you do is inclusionary zoning, we'll never get there to 2,000. So we're going to need to encourage building on public lands in strategic places. The Civic Core in Chevy Chase is one key one, where you can build affordable housing on top of the library rec center, and you can achieve more than the 8-10% that you get through inclusionary zoning. So that's one thing. The Wardman is of a species of that. What people talked about was we should buy the Wardman and then do with it whatever we could in order to have significant affordable housing on that site. That was a good idea, and I wish it had happened. The mayor was not interested in that idea, and it didn't happen. And unless you could get the mayor to engage on it and pursue it, it won't happen, and it hasn't happened. But that idea, and I would like to make a run at it to push to see if we can make it happen, but I'm not optimistic that the mayor is going to move on that. She's dug in for a while on it, and I don't see her moving. But there are other opportunities where we may be able to purchase land and build affordable housing on it. There are things like in Friendship Heights where there's going to be a lot of building going on, where we can use incentives in order to sweeten the deal for the builders to make sure that they include a higher percentage of affordable housing. Those are the kinds of things that I would pursue to increase affordable housing. The points David makes about the voucher program are serious. The voucher program, it's a well-intended program, but the way in which it's been executed has not been successful. And it's really important that it succeed. So, when I go door to door in Cleveland Park, I've often had people say, when the Brooks on Idaho Avenue was proposed, the transitional housing facility, they would say, I fought it with everything I had, but you know what? It's been okay. When things succeed, you can build support for it. When they don't, you build division and you build resentment. And we need to seriously address the issues around the voucher program. It's part of a program called Housing First, and Housing First implies that there's something that comes next. And we need to make sure that our people who need services are getting appropriate services. We need to make sure that people who aren't ready for independent living options get what they need in order to get on their feet and thrive. We have to be very careful to make sure that we don't encourage a program that cannibalizes one form of affordable housing with another, where we have highly subsidized housing for the very poor that is very profitable for landlords, but then eats up the stock of affordable housing for middle income residents in the form of rent control units. We need to be welcoming. We need to bring more people into Ward 3, and we need to create opportunities for people at every income level to live in Ward 3. But we also need to do it right. And getting that right is going to require building coalitions across the city to see the issues and build support for credible solutions while we are still doing all we can to be welcoming. I am absolutely convinced that I am the person to pursue that. I think I can be effective at it. I think I can be heard by people all around the city when I raise these issues. I think asking for a moratorium is just shuts people down. I don't think that you're gonna win support for the kinds of changes that we need if that's how you get started at it. But is the issue a serious issue? Yes. On DHCA, I mean, the operation of that.
Actually, Matt, I'm going to cut you. I'm going to let David respond because we got to keep it going.
I want to just respond to the acquisition of land by the city. I agree, if the city already owns the land, like the Chevy Chase core that Matt just discussed, and you want to have greater density of affordable units within that, that's fine. And the Brooks is a good example of a successful project. Having said that, I am usually opposed to the city acquiring land that is private. So when the city acquires the private land through eminent domain or by being I guess competitive bidder and wins the bid, it falls off the tax rolls. It's no longer real estate taxable. The only public land that I'm looking for the city to acquire is federal land. If we can find federal land, what's going to happen to the Homeland Security site at Nebraska and Massachusetts? I mean, there's a place in Michigan called the Commons at Traverse City, could be duplicated there potentially. But you have to, so if you're going to acquire land, I would not have the city acquire private land. I would have the city, through complex negotiations, but aggressive negotiations with the feds, acquire federal land.
And I would have the city acquire federal land, that's for sure. Another example of an opportunity is the Intelsat Whittle building, which could be used to address a lot of needs. That's got a big, steep price tag to it. But purchasing private land, I don't see an issue with it. Where there's an opportunity where the city can acquire land and then have a private developer do an RFP, have a private developer come in, make proposals that could include increased affordable housing. That was the idea around the Wardman that many people liked and that I liked. I don't think you take that kind of option off the table. Purchasing federal land is actually a thing that we've done pretty commonly. There's a lot of talk about purchasing RFK. Reservation 13 was federal land. Let's talk about Poplar Point and what we would do with Poplar Point. I think that St. Elizabeth's, which is the city has essentially purchased from the feds and is doing exciting things. David is right that Homeland Security site at Nebraska Avenue in Massachusetts is an extraordinary opportunity. We're not there yet. They haven't vacated. But when a day comes where they vacate, the city should take a hard look at it. All of it costs money. And you can't ask for every single one of them. But looking for targeted ways where we acquire land wherever we can as a way of getting more affordable housing built and meeting city needs. Because when I talk about the Intelsat Whittle building, it may be affordable housing, but it also could be school capacity, could also be a senior wellness center kind of thing. But being strategic about grabbing opportunities that we can pursue our big picture goals, 100% for it.
Let's move on to a very hyper local issue: bicycle lanes on Connecticut Avenue. No decision has been made yet about bicycle lanes on Connecticut Avenue north of location. The planned south of Legation provide for 2 bike and pedestrian lanes. If the same plans are adopted for Connecticut Avenue north of Legation Street, then we will see the creation of north and southbound lanes for bicycles that, according to proponents, will improve the safety for riders and pedestrians with the added benefit of removing cars from the road and enhancing the environment. Opponents say that, and this is from one resident, I'm quoting, shrinking capacity does nothing to reduce dependency on cars, but rather makes driving much worse. Giving drivers less roadway is not an enhancement. We have talked with local businesses, and for the most part, they also oppose the proposal. So, David, why don't you go ahead and first and talk about your views on this?
Thank you for the question. So I've been opposed to the Connecticut Avenue Concept C bike lanes for almost a year now. I was out saying it, and I've been called every single name in the book on a variety of websites because I have the temerity to say, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. And if I'm elected, I will ask for an immediate sit down with the mayor to say, hey, I'm the non-Democrat in Ward 3, and I just got elected, and saving Connecticut Avenue has been part of my platform all along. You can take a look at the sign right there. And I just got elected. Let's talk about this. It's time for DDOT to cancel the plan. As far as going from past military, I guess Legation to the Chevy Chase Circle, I would if I'm not elected, I would expect that to occur. No doubt. I have no doubt that would be the next progression of the Concept C bike lanes. I just want to say on a couple policy points regarding transportation. Bike lanes, if you're going to have them, work better in the middle than on the outside because there's less variables in the middle. Having said that, I'm not so sure that on Connecticut Avenue we have the space for them like they have on Pennsylvania Avenue between the Capitol and the White House, which is significantly wider than Connecticut Avenue. So, but they work better in the middle. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, we got to explore again federal land. Maybe we could have a dedicated bike path as a continuation of Nevada Avenue east of Broad Branch to the Pierce Mill area. That's something that we should look at. And just again, the Connecticut. Oh, what I was just going to say that the bike lanes are not conducive for safety. They provide a false sense of security, and they are definitely not good for seniors. And lastly, I want to say bus lanes or more enhancing Metro bus is something that I think is interesting. So if there are, we have to enforce the road. Like, for example, when it used to be at 4 o'clock, everybody would have to get off Connecticut Avenue. Now, I'll talk about in the parking lanes. Now that's not enforced. So I want to see enforcement on Connecticut Avenue like it used to be. I want to see the buses have the right of way, particularly during rush hour. I want to see maybe smaller buses, more attractive buses. I want to see potentially more loading zones because we do a ton of stuff by Amazon or by UPS or by FedEx every day now. So maybe we do lose, God forbid, a few parking spaces, everyone. It's okay if we can actually have more loading and if we actually have better busing, because that's going to help more people go from point A to point B. But bike lanes on Connecticut Avenue is a no-go for David for Ward 3 campaign. Thank you very much.
Matt, so where do you weigh in on this?
Yeah, so I have said from the start, including back in the primary in the spring, that I support in principle Concept C. I want to make sure that we work closely with everyone to try to address issues around seniors, people with disability, supporting our small businesses. And that is the spirit that I bring to this. I think having a safe route for bicycles is important. We want to be multimodal. Climate change is real. We want to encourage alternative modes of transportation. I'm 63 years old. I've had full reconstructions of both my knees. I had a failed replacement of one knee. I ride my electric assist bike everywhere. Not everyone can do it, and we have to be very mindful of that. Many people are going to drive, but we do. The future is to promote alternative modes of transportation. That's frankly part of the Democratic platform nationwide. When you see things that are being proposed by Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg and the Biden administration, this is bigger than us, and we do need to try to make it work. I have gone out, DDOT has done block by block walks, 2 of them so far, starting at Calvert Street and first to Porter and then from Porter up to Davenport, and there will be another one coming up. And those are 6-hour walks with big groups of people. Some are supporters of the bike lanes, some are opponents of the bike lanes. And we talk about all of the specific issues around the bike lanes on a block by block basis. Is there parking and loading for this building? How will you access it if the bike lane is there? What do you do when you have a contractor who comes and is going to be working in the building? How do you address the needs of seniors and people with handicaps? And it has been a very constructive process. Now, I'm not going to say to you that in that process, I've been able to see the solution to every single issue. I actually, there have been ideas that have been raised that are significant changes to the plan that's on paper now that I think could make things a lot better. And there are places where I'm scratching my head about how is this going to be solved, but I want to try to solve it. And so I want to be really clear that I hear the people who feel like they have not been consulted on this, even if there's been a long process, who feel like this is a lot of change and they want to be heard and they have very serious concerns. I take those things seriously. That is actually the kind of, that's taking those concerns seriously is exactly what I've done at every stage of my life in public service, trying to figure out solutions so we can get something done in a way that works for as many people as possible. That's what I take pride in doing. And that's the spirit I want to bring to this process.
So Matt, wait, so are you for bike lanes north of Legation or not?
Oh, so on the question, I was talking about the bike lanes generally. Frankly, where I am today is I want to grapple with the thing that's in front of me now before I start thinking about what the next thing is. And so I would not want to see any kind of a fast track or anything like that. Let's grapple with what we have. Someday it may be that there's a bike lane that comes down from Montgomery County and then you want to be connecting it up. But for right now, where we are, my focus is on this big plan that is out there and trying to work with people to make sure that that can work. You know, when I talked about the Brooks and how that's a project that worked and makes it easier to do the next thing, I think we need to make this work before we get to where we're talking about additions to it.
Matt, do you have any questions you'd like to pose to David on this particular issue? And we're going to do it the other way around too.
Yeah. On this particular issue, no, I don't. I mean, I think David's been clear about his position. And I think, you know, I'm trying to make it work. There's a difference here, and I don't think that. I don't have any questions to draw that out further.
David?
But I don't want to lose the opportunity to ask questions. Should David ask questions?
No, we'll try to be fair on that.
I appreciate Matt's answer, but it really is a non-answer regarding the continuation from Legation to Chevy Chase Circle. I think that if you speak with people, and I know Matt has spoken with people, it seems that DDOT is quite aggressive in this department, and perhaps the Democratic point that Matt talks about from up high is something that we should not necessarily follow here on Connecticut Avenue. So I would say we are of our own independent judgment, and I don't believe that Matt's answer was concrete. And with me, you're going to get maybe a little bit blunt, but you're going to get concrete answers on these questions. And I appreciate everybody listening and interacting. But yeah, my position is sound on this.
I have a question from a gentleman in the chat. He says, as part of the concept C is DDOT reducing the number of bus stops along Connecticut Avenue. If yes, will this damage ridership? Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, so I mean, where the bus stops are going to go and how many of them there are going to be is part of the ongoing conversation. The bus stops move in some cases in ways that are intended to make them safer and make them more efficient. And the idea, supporting bus transportation is a critical priority also. We do want to get people out of single occupancy vehicles as much as we can. It's the future of the planet. And so doing whatever we do in a way that promotes bus transport as well, and I'd add electrified bus transport ideally, is going to be an important part of the conversation going forward.
You know, when I was younger, there used to be a lot more L buses than there are now. The L5, I think, used to be a dedicated line from, let's say, Chevy Chase Circle to DuPont Circle at rush hour. I could be wrong. If somebody's a Metro bus expert, that's what I remember. So we can have different bus lines, do different things. Let's not lose bus stops. Let's also, for sure, make the bus stops as safe as possible. But I think that regarding the bike lanes and the bus stops, I don't think the bike lanes are pro-bus. In fact, I would say they're not pro-bus. I think that an example of the failure of the bike lanes would be on K Street, east of the convention center. And you could see that the bike lanes have led to a tremendous tumults and back and forth between bus users, bikers, pedestrians, and seniors. So I am with Matt on busing. I think we got to be creative with busing. And I think that getting a lot of people on buses is fine. I'm for that. Let's work together to do that.
So, and on buses, I mean, we need to strengthen WMATA in every possible way. And so that is an important priority for the Metro and for buses. Now, we do need to think about a next generation approach on buses. One of the weaknesses in our bus system, and this is different than the bike lane issue, is the weakness of east-west travel. And we should be having smaller buses that go into the neighborhoods, over to the corridors, so that people have an alternative to having to drive to the business district. That's a thing that's done in lots of different places. And we should be looking at that sort of an approach up and down the corridor and throughout the city. So promoting bus transportation is a very high priority for me. One of the things that's out there on this that I think is very constructive is Charles Allen's proposal for the $100 renewable fare card, where every district resident gets a card that they can use to ride the metro or buses, and it has $100 in value on it. And if you use it during the month and it runs out, so it doesn't have anything on it, you touch it on the metro station, kiosk, and it refills it to $100. So if you're using it, it costs the city money, but it's a way of supporting WMATA. And if you're not using it, it doesn't cost the city. We need to be looking at creative ways to try to support WMATA going forward.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to the next topic. We have a few and we only have 15 minutes left. This has to do with the Civic Core. Redeveloping the Chevy Chase Library and the Chevy Chase Community Center in various forms has been under discussion for decades. What can the city council and particularly you do to accelerate the process? What is your vision for the future of the complex? And how do you factor in affordable housing? We touched on some of these, but Matt, I'd like you to give us your thoughts.
Sure. So what happens in other places, and I think is about to happen here, is that the city issues a request for proposals to get different potential developers to come up with their way of achieving the goals that the city wants to achieve on that piece of property. And so getting that request for proposal right, and then getting it out so we start to see the ideas that creative people can come up with for how we tackle the project is a key thing. If the RFP is not out by the time that I get on the council, I will be meeting with the Office of Planning to talk about getting that RFP out and what it should include. In my opinion, that RFP should include plans for the rec center and the library. Keep the funding in the budget to pay for that so that it's not part of, so that that portion of the project is supported by existing funding. Plans for housing on top that has a transition to the houses behind so that it doesn't, so that it's fair to the people who live behind, that can accommodate affordable housing at every income level. And we want to do significant affordable housing over that site. Not all 30% AMI. For those who aren't familiar with it, that's average median income, but a range from people with 30% AMI up to workforce housings of teachers, firefighters, and police can live in that housing. We also, right now, that property serves lots of purposes. It has parking on it. It has a basketball court. It has a nice courtyard kind of area. The RFP should call for proposals that include those elements, includes parking, includes a public gathering space, and that fits nicely with the neighborhood. So work with the Office of Planning to get an appropriate RFP out, and then push the project forward. That's sort of what's been done at the Reeves Center, at Reservation 13, and other places in the city, and we just need to push it forward.
David, you have a background in real estate and in construction and in economics. What would it take to, am I right? I hope I'm right.
I appreciate that. I hope that everything you say is correct, but I'm not sure that it's all perfect. But go ahead.
Well, none of us are perfect. But what would it take to induce developers to build on that site, bearing in mind the RFP that Matt has suggested will come out? Are the incentives enough? Will developers come out, and can public-private partnerships exist on such a site?
I think the site's a great site. I mean, you got pretty good density all around it, and you don't have a lot there already. So the objective would be to have developers compete. So Matt was talking about developing an RFP where developers are competing. So I mean, the traditional way to incentivize developers is tax incentives versus their credits versus their real estate taxes over time, and that gets diminished. Maybe there could be industrial revenue bonds that could go into it. The only thing I would say is that Matt's right, let's get this done real quickly, but not until after November 8th. Before then, let's vote inside of that building.
Well, whoever wins this seat, I've been growing old, waiting for something to occur there. I hope that either of you or both of you have the power to move that promptly. Thank you for those answers. Is there any exchange on that between the two of you?
I mean, I think that, I don't think our views are particularly different. One of the incentives here, though, is access to land value. One of the big barriers to building affordable housing is the cost of land. And so if there's an RFP to build housing on that site, and there isn't a cost associated with the land, then it'll make it very attractive for the developers.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to crime. And this is our last major topic. We have other smaller ones. Matt, you propose to, quote, make a concerted effort to address the root causes of crime and show that those most susceptible to being caught up in crime, that we are trying to do so. Could you please explain this idea, root causes, and what are the root causes? How do you propose to address them?
Yeah, so, okay, thank you very much for that. And I do want to start off by saying, because we're watching local TV and I see advertisements attacking it, Abigail Spanberger, and I hear people I see how she's linked with other people, and there's a kind of guilt by association and assumed position by association, and I feel like that playbook, which is a national Republican playbook, is being used on me to some extent. So I want to start by saying that it has been my position from the start in this campaign that we do need more police. The crime is up, police are down, we need more police. We need to try to bend the culture and the relationship of the police with the affected communities. That's a super important thing to be doing also. And we need to emphasize some of the alternative approaches like violence interruption and restorative justice that have seen some success in different places. And we need to use those kinds of tools to get things done. But in the long run, you're never going to incarcerate your way to safety. We need to create hope and opportunity for everybody in this city. And so that connects up to everything else in my platform. Education and making sure we're delivering a great education to all of the kids in our city. That's the key. How do you get there? How do you create a sense of hope unless you're doing that? And there's lots of ways to do that, to craft opportunities for education in different kinds of ways. Maybe it's more vocational education. Maybe it's more teachers in schools where the kids are facing particular challenges. There's all different kinds of things to do, but really creating great education for our kids is a key thing. Affordable housing is another important thing. And fundamentally, poverty is the root source of crime. And so we need to, not every criminal is living in poverty, but many of the people who commit crimes are living in poverty, and we need to address that and create hope for people. So affordable housing is another piece of it. Today, in the wake of the pandemic, we're facing a mental health crisis in this city and country. And so having the kinds of services that are necessary to help address that crisis is also key to crime fighting. So, 50 years ago, and you read my platform, so you're aware of it. 50 years ago, in the wake of the riots, there was a question, and people like Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy and the Kerner Commission said that fundamentally we need to attack the root causes of crime, which is poverty and hopelessness. And there was on the other side a kind of law and order camp that we need to have stricter enforcement. And we did not do the attack of the root causes of crime in anything like the way that had been proposed by those folks. And who out there doesn't wish we had? Wouldn't we be better off if we had? So there's fear about crime, and there's talk about stricter enforcement, but you cannot address it unless you're also attacking the root causes. I go door to door and I have lots of people who say crime is up and it really worries me, but I'm not sure what to do about it because the challenge of addressing root causes is so big. But it's the challenge we have to pursue. And just running on fear and that crime is up doesn't get us there. We got to attack the root causes, otherwise we're never going to get to safety.
Matt, let me follow up.
Sure.
We talked about education. We talked about affordable housing. Both of those are connected, as you just said, to the root causes of crime. And yet we, I think, concluded that both of those, or the issue of poverty, is a very long-term set of problems that need to be solved in a systematic but long-term way. I didn't hear an answer from you that relieves me or solves my issue of immediate solutions to crime in the streets that is growing in Ward 3.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, but I think I started by, first of all, your question was, what's this about root causes? But I started by saying we need more police. And we do. We need to be hiring more police, and we need to be working with the police to change the culture so that there's better outreach to the communities, there's better relationships with the communities. But hiring more police, I think, is the immediate thing that we need to do. And being smart about who we're hiring and what the culture is another very important thing to do. So I think that I addressed what you're talking about, but I also, your question went to root causes, so I focused.
That's correct. That's correct. David, the same question.
Yeah, so if you're looking for a candidate who is not going to join Charles Allen on the council, I'm your guy. If you're looking for someone who doesn't believe that we are sending the correct message presently to people who will consider committing a crime, I'm your guy. If you're looking for someone who would like to have the police's back, I'm your guy. So in all these areas, we need to have a different way of being on the council for the District of Columbia. The council for the District of Columbia has migrated from the middle left to the far left, and they have bought into too many things. Matt discussed a tremendous amount of things. Here's what I got. This is my wallet. We have a $19.5 billion budget for a population of 700,000 people. We're spending a tremendous amount of money already, and the council is looking to spend all of the rest of it in our pockets, okay? We have to incorporate policing enforcement into the equation. And it also relates to something Matt talked about earlier, which I agree with, which is going east-west with small buses. Well, guess what? If we don't enforce people parking and dropping off stuff on Irving Street, no one can go to the east. And so we have to enforce the law. The number one point, or the number one objective of local government first, is keeping us safe. We have let our city down. And the Democrats, not just in the District of Columbia, but in cities across this country, in Seattle, in Los Angeles, where it is universal Democratic control, are doing this. They are placating where they should be legislating positive enforcement of the rule of law at the same time that they are concerned about the things that Matt was discussing. This is the most fundamental point. As Matt and I went through plenty of things today regarding Chevy Chase, where we are really in unison. But when it comes to public safety and having people in our city leave, businesses close, we have to make a stand. Again, there has never been a non-Democrat elected to the council from a ward. Now is the time.
Oh, okay, let me follow. One second, Matt, you'll have a shot. I hear that what you're saying, but I didn't hear specific A, B,
Okay,
and
well,
C.
look, here's a specific. Here's a specific. Mary Che talked about the expansion of a definition of a juvenile after there was a quintuple shooting on Connecticut Avenue at the Days Inn. 4 days later, she's out of the race because she got hit from the left. Okay, the U.S. Attorney from the District of Columbia is concerned about Charles Allen and people on the council having the ability to write legislation, and then when the mayor, who I don't think is a good manager, but understands when things are getting too far, she'll veto it. But if there is a block on the left, they will overwrite that veto. Then it's going to go to the oversight committee. And guess what? Then it's a whole nother story there. So we can't have this any longer. We can't have the increase of the definition of a juvenile. We cannot have jury trials for misdemeanors. You want specifics, read what the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia is saying. Our court system is bogged down and ineffective. This area, we have to take a more aggressive stance on the council in a new direction. It's +1 for public safety with me. It is +1 for a union between Alyssa Silverman, Brianda Doe, Charles Allen, Robert White, and others on the council who will have at least 9 persons with Matt Frumin on the council. Matt's been great on public housing. He's strong on public schools. This department, we cannot have this choice. We have to elect David Krucoff in Ward 3.
I'm going to ask the indulgence of our attendees for another 5 or so minutes to finish up. Matt, you had something you were waiting to say.
At this point now I have an awful lot. So the revisions to the criminal code, that's one of the things that David was talking about. My former ANC 3E did a great session on this where they had Charles Allen, they had the 2 people from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they had 1 person from the commission that's been working on this. People have been working on it for years. And it was fascinating because as you dug into it, the differences were pretty modest, and they were things that the lead U.S. attorney person, they were talking about word changes here, word changes there. I really think it's important to dig into the details on this, and whatever was proposed before it's part of a process that's being refined, but it becomes used as a boogeyman, and it's a boogeyman. I'm going to be that, me, Alyssa, Brianne, we're all one thing. I started by saying, I think we need more police. I mean, I don't think you can fit me into that pigeonhole. It is exactly the Republican playbook everywhere across the country to raise a specter of fear and try to tie a reasonable person to it. Don't buy it, please. Don't buy it. Now, David also he talked about increasing enforcement, this and that, and poo-pooed, held up his wallet and implied we can't do anything more to create an opportunity. That is exactly the dynamic that I was talking about. Exactly the dynamic that I was talking about. If you think we're just going to enforce our way to safety, and we're not going to, and we don't need to be determined to create opportunity for people who feel that they don't have opportunity and feel that they're marginalized, it's a fantasy. We're not going to get there. We have to take seriously creating a sense of opportunity for more people in this city if we're going to get to safety. And just focusing on enforcement and just appealing to fear is not the way to do it. It could have been when David was doing that litany about cities and Democrats and all around the country. You could have closed your eyes and heard Donald Trump. I mean, I don't think of David as Donald Trump, but in that passage, you can't distinguish. And we need to be responsible about addressing public safety, but we need to see it as part of a broader context. And I would dare say, everybody I've talked to out in Ward 3 understands that. I want to be serious about public safety, but I don't want to act like that's the only thing you do. We need to be creating opportunity. And if we don't, we fail to do so at our peril.
Matt, thank you. I'm sure, David, you have
Well,
a response to that.
I am concerned about our wallet, our collective wallets, and the largesse that Matt insinuated without specifics. I also wish to be empathetic. I wish to be understanding and inclusive and transparent, but I believe that I am the public safety candidate in Ward 3, and I stand behind that position.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Let's wrap up. We have a couple of minutes each. I think we started with Matt. So this time we'll start with David. Why don't you give us a wrap up on whatever you want to say?
Yeah, first off, I want to just thank you and everybody in Chevy Chase for hosting us tonight. It's been a very great evening and great back and forth. And I really, I can say it, you can call it a forum. I like to call this a debate. So I want to thank Matt for this great debate. I'm looking for, I know that we would be represented well by Matt and I, by either one of us if we're elected, but I believe that just being represented well is not enough. And I would ask you if you're happy with the status quo and whether you think that things are going the right direction, and whether you believe that now is the time that we make a change, and that we concern ourselves with safety, with the value of our homes in the economy, whether our apartment rents are going up too much, and whether our traffic is going to fall down. And I look for your participation in all these areas, but I think that if we don't incorporate different points of view on the council, we're looking at a potential return to the past that involves, rather than local prosperity, we're looking potentially at more federal oversight. And none of us want that. The R next to my name also stands for reform. The drop-off boxes open this Friday for a change that will provide hope, as recognized by the Washington Post, and that'll help DC thrive. I ask for your vote for DC Council from Ward 3.
Thank you. Matt, your final words?
Thank you very much. And I want to thank everybody for participating. I want to thank David for a great evening. I want to thank our moderators. I'll end where I started. I have worked hard in this community for 15 years, and I have been very fortunate to be able to do it. And I've worked with a lot of people in this community and across the city to solve problems. There's some kind of an effort to pigeonhole me as being some sort of an ideologue, and to anybody who knows me, it makes them dizzy because it doesn't make any sense. I am a pragmatist who works with people to get things done. I have a long, long history of doing that and success after success. I'm a listener, I'm a coalition builder, I'm a consensus builder. That's what I want to bring to the council, and I want to do it on behalf of the residents of Ward 3. A different thing that I bring to the council is that I've worked all across the city. People in every corner of the city have viewed me as an advocate for them. At the same time that I advocated for the modernization of Murch Elementary School, I was a leading advocate for the modernization of what was then called Orr Elementary School in Ward 8. That does not go unnoticed. People know that I've gone to bat for them, and that even as I've gone to bat for folks in Ward 3, and it puts me in a good position to work with others on the council in order to get things done and in order to get the perspective of residents in Ward 3 across to people in other parts of the city who may not start out being sympathetic. I believe that I have the capacity to be a truly great representative for Ward 3. I ask for your vote. I ask for your help as I pursue that goal, because I will be turning to people in the community relentlessly for feedback and support in trying to achieve goals that are important for the city and for the ward. Check out my website, fruminforward3.com. Get your ballot. Take it to the ballot boxes that are opening or come out on November 8th. I hope to win your support, and I hope to work closely with you for the next 4 years to make a positive difference for the city and for Ward 3.
Thank you very much. I want to thank both candidates, David and Matt. I want to thank the attendees. This session has been recorded. It'll be up on YouTube. You can search for it in a day or two on the Chevy Chase Citizens.org website if you want to see it again or recommend it to others. And finally, Chevy Chase Citizens Association will be pleased to work with either of you when the election is over. So thank you again and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.